Hey guys, how you doing? This is Chad Sanderson with the Conversionations podcast, here with you from beautiful Austin, Texas. We are at the CXL Live 2018 conference, and today we're going to be talking to some of the best optimizers in the industry to get their insights on what they do best. I'm really excited about what we have coming up because these guests are awesome and they have a lot of really interesting things to tell you about. Chad Sanderson here, yet again, with L's Arts. Now, we are going to ask some really interesting stuff about her specialty. She is the master of user research, usability, and user testing. Okay, so Els, question number one. If somebody has never done user research before, and they want to prove that it's something valuable to their business, where do they start? And then how do they prove that out to their stakeholders?
Okay. Well, I think surveys are probably a very easy way to start doing user research because there's a lot of tools out there that are very either free or inexpensive, like Hotjar, for example, where you can just get surveys up and running, and you can do quantitative and qualitative surveys, get that data. If you have enough audience, sometimes that data is enough to generate ideas for an A/B test. Do that, prove your value. Or if you don't have enough volume for an A/B test, you can just make some changes to the site, measure the before, measure the after. I know it's not ideal, but if that's what you gotta do, it's what you gotta do. And then prove your value that way. Also, just if you do qualitative surveys, if you ask people about their feelings, their emotions, like for example, what's holding them back from buying, or after they've bought from your website, what was the one thing that made you choose us and not our competitors? That just gives you real insight into your users, and that is something that sadly a lot of companies are lacking. So surveys are a great first step.
Well, that's actually a great transition to my next question.
Alrighty.
Which was, there's a lot of businesses out there that when they do surveys, they're running things like 5-point scales of user satisfaction and asking people sort of these attitudinal type questions. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you recommend?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I should have said there are good surveys and then there are bad surveys. I'm not a huge fan of the NPS myself because, well, I think it's a bit of a weird system. What does that mean? What is that magical difference between that 8 and that 9 on that point scale?
Right.
When you do an NPS, I always recommend to ask additional open questions, like to the people who are your so-called promoters, the 9s and 10s. What's the one thing that makes you love us, best? To the people who are just below that, the 7/8s, what could we do extra to make us gain this one more point? And to the ones who don't like you very much, you ask them, okay, what could we do to improve? So you get actual, real feedback from them, more than just this silly number, because that usually doesn't mean very much.
So basically what you're saying is we are trying to understand the context of why someone feels a certain way, rather than just looking at a score and trying to get value from some number that we don't really understand.
Exactly, because maybe some people are a little bit more harsh than others. For some people, a 7 is really, really good. Other people just throw around 10s like it's Christmas every day. So getting a bit of, like you said, context with that number is very important.
Awesome. Well, Els, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on.
Very welcome.
Hey everybody, this is Chad Sanderson here with Matt Sanderson, formerly of Kayak, Booking.com, and also OpenTable. So, Matt, before we start, can you just tell us a little bit about what you did in your previous role?
So at OpenTable and Kayak, I was a senior director of product management. At Booking.com, I had quite a lot of different roles, but I was running and starting teams around experimentation and A/B testing, conversion optimization. I've done it about for 10 years. My main focus was things around data science, email marketing, and things like that.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. So one of the things I'm super interested in is the amazing way that Booking.com has been able to scale the experimentation process. So for a lot of the new businesses or medium-sized businesses that have put together an experimentation program, how should they start thinking about when is a good time to scale?
It's a good question. When I joined Booking.com, our optimization team was like 5 guys around the table, doing about, I think, 40 experiments per month or something like that. When I left, we had scaled it up to a department of more than 400 people, just churning out experiments, churning out insights, and so on. So I'm not sure like when it's like that magic inflection point where you really should change really can step on the gas pedals and start scaling. I think it is when you first start at a team, you need to sort of figure out the formula for you. What's the metrics? What's at least what sort of like the basic metrics you are targeting. Get your tools right and so on, and then at some point, I think you just know that it's time to step on the gas pedal.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so another question that I'm sure you get really often, and as someone who's managed a large team in a very large companies doing this very well, what are kind of the critical components of a good experimentation team?
I really think the first thing you need to get in place is people who are truly passionate about experimentation. Not everyone are. I think probably experimentation isn't really for everyone. It is a specific mindset where it's a scientific mindset. You need to be not data driven necessarily. Well, you need to be data driven, but everyone is sort of data driven. You need to be results driven and really want to make money and do it in this very structured fashion. And that's not for everyone, and that's fine, but you need to have a core of people who think like that. And I think it helps if you have people who maybe are coming from a background where they have worked as freelancers. I used to look for when I'm sort of like reviewing CVs and things like that, I used to have an eye on whether this is a person who have worked directly with a function where they had to bring in money for themselves like directly. So like having freelancer roles, having been in a startup, having maybe done some sort of sales job in the past, things like that. Now everyone in the team doesn't need to be like that, but like if you're starting up something, I think it's good to have a core of people like that.
So like self-sufficient activators.
Yes, but also like I'm kind of thinking like people who know where their lunch money is coming from in a way. And I don't mean to sound like dismissive of other people, but just people who have had that like really direct experience in their career.
Okay.
And then of course you need engineers. I think people often staff the teams with front-end engineers, but I think you should typically have a back-end engineer as well. And then that's sort of like the standard stack of people.
So that's really interesting. I see sometimes there's a lot of larger companies that when they're hiring for experimentation roles, they're almost exclusively focusing on the engineering side. And what you're saying is that you really need to have kind of a healthy balance between the engineering side and people, like you said, who know where the money is coming from and are able to find those interesting.
Yeah, I would say like you need engineers that maybe have worked in a startup or have done something else or been freelancers in the past. So I wouldn't like hire salespeople. I would try to find those kinds of engineers.
Right, engineers with a relatively unique background.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, that's awesome. All right, so another question that I've personally had is there's this interesting system within the Booking network. Where Booking.com has an internal tool that they use, and OpenTable uses Optimizely. At least they used Optimizely at one point, right?
Yeah.
So where are sort of the pros and cons of having an internal system versus using a third-party testing tool?
It's a good question, because I would say if you have all the resources in the world, an internal system is always going to be better. You're closer to the data, you don't have to do any sort of like abstractions like you have to do with Optimizely, where you typically set up like a URL pattern to match conversions. You can actually have real conversions with real tracking of cancellations and things like that, as you do in Optimizely. And so it's always better to have an internal system for sure, but it is difficult to make, and it's hard to build up that knowledge and competency in-house. So everything in business is trade-offs, and until, well, it's a good question. It really comes down to your organization, I think, when you can really, what you really should do. Optimizely does go a long way of making sure you can do most of the things you want. I was actually quite happy with Optimizely, except when we tried to do more complicated things. So I guess at some point you just realize that like I really want to do things where I change backend code. I really want to do experiments like that, and then it's probably time to start working on an internal tool.
Right, makes complete sense. Okay, so last question, what are you interested in working on right now? Like, what are some of your goals and personal pursuits?
I was planning to ask about that because, like, you know, I just left the booking group, and one thing I'm doing is I'm starting out working on a book where I want to take sort of the methods we use in conversion optimization and the really practical, pragmatic approach to behavior change online, and see if we can take those methodologies and apply to making people behave better online. So sort of taking the research that's done on pro-social behavior, of which there is a lot, and sort of putting it into the sort of practical applicable a practical applicable format in the same way people have done with cognitive biases and things like that. So I'm hoping it's gonna work out. I'm really starting out looking at it, but it's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like a really interesting and important area to focus on, because so much that happens on the internet is just this unfiltered and almost constant stream of negativity.
Yeah.
And when people are anonymous, they can do whatever they want, they can act any way that they want. And so what you're saying is that there may be a way to inspire people to act in a way that's better towards their fellow man or woman through some of the same techniques we use in A/B testing.
Yeah, exactly. I think like there's some things like you see some of these social media sites have almost the negativity built in. Like one tiny example is Facebook, where you can give sort of positive feedback to people's messages, but you can't really give any simple negative feedback. There's no dislike button. So when you actually dislike something enough, you end up writing something very explicit, and you get this like outburst of really direct negativity, while the positivity is coming in like a small neutral count of likes.
Makes complete sense. I know I would probably respond to a lot less people's stupid Facebook walls if I had some like easy way of just saying that I disagree.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Matt, thanks a lot for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad.
Hey y'all, we're here with Merritt Aho from Dun & Bradstreet. So, Merritt, one of the things that I've been really curious about is some insight into your ideation strategy, because from what I've heard, it's really interesting and different from what a lot of companies are doing right now.
Sure. So yeah, one of the things that makes it different for us is the scope of our ideation, right? A lot of people get together in groups and they try to come to a unanimous decision, right? They throw out a bunch of ideas and they start discussing those ideas, and emotions get involved and people are defensive and they're rationalizing and justifying things, and we separate the decision-making process from the ideation process, and it allows people to think much more creatively, and they put their guards down. But really, it's the mindset of going for a quantity of ideas versus a quality of ideas. I mean, you want good ideas, but we're not so good at filtering out the good from the bad in our heads, and so you really want people to throw those filters down and get everything out, and you have to have that sort of safe environment for them to do it.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me, because oftentimes a lot of optimization programs I see, you usually have one guy or a couple people who say things like, I don't like that idea, or that idea is stupid, and that idea is bad. And what you're talking about is more like embracing all the ideas and letting people kind of have the freedom to come up with something unique.
Yeah, I mean, you never know how your idea, however outlandish it sounds in your head, is going to spark some creativity in somebody else. Moreover, I mean, you don't want a bunch of people trying to decide on which ideas are good together. There's really only one or two people that usually need to be involved in a decision at the end of the day. And I mean, we're talking about a testing environment. So what do you really have to lose by going with one idea over another when the data can decide for you?
Yeah, very true. Okay, so since you've implemented this relatively revolutionary way of coming up with ideas, what sort of effects have you seen compared to where you were not doing this in the past?
Right. Well, a couple things. I mean, just to share one example, there was a time a while ago where we did some ideation. We got a dozen people together and we came out with 30 ideas and ran a bunch of tests based on those ideas, and none of them were implementable. Right? We didn't go through the process well enough to get to good ideas. These days, it's very different. The tone of it is different. People like doing ideation. They enjoy it. They look forward to it. And I think we go much deeper within each session, come out with a lot more ideas to select from. And it's maybe too soon to tell if our win rate has really gone up as a result, but there's room to dig into that, I think.
Yeah. So it seems like that the positive benefits from something like this is more along the lines of getting people really excited about the ideation process, getting them more involved, maybe making them more accepting and open to ideas instead of potentially closing off things that might be winners in the first place. Yeah. And even if you can't tell, like you said, you've just implemented this relatively recently, but in the long run, maybe you will see a difference, but it may be more about getting the people in your team and outside of your team to come together and function more as a unit instead of trying to tear each other down. So would you say that the majority of the positive impact of this type of ideation is more around getting people to kind of come together and understand that the ideation process is not something that one person should be doing by themselves, but it's more about team building, and that's the way you're able to come up with this wider range of good ideas?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple clear benefits that we've had as a result of this. One is it's elevated ideation as an important part of the optimization process for us, right? So we do it a lot more, and I think as a result we end up with better ideas. As you mentioned, it's selecting your ideas from a much wider universe of possibilities, rather than if you just sit down and by yourself try to think of solutions to a problem that's been uncovered by research. You're just considering a much smaller range of options. Invariably, stuff comes out of the woodworks when you do ideation right that you just hadn't thought of before, and you probably wouldn't have thought of had you not been working with other people. We underestimate the impact that someone else's perspective is going to have on our own creativity.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Awesome ideas. Great talking to you. Thanks a lot, Merritt.
Thanks.